When I asked about my husband's sister's engagement dinner, he said, "Oh, that was yesterday. Just immediate family." A week later he called panicked. "My card was declined. Did you pay the bill?" I replied coolly, "I must have forgotten, just like you forgot your wife." The card declined at 8:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night that would change everything. I was standing in our marble-countered kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, listening to Jeffrey's panicked voice crackling through the speaker from some upscale restaurant downtown. "Nicole, my card just got declined in front of the Harrison Industries team. Did you forget to pay the bill?" His voice carried that particular strain of public embarrassment mixed with private accusation that I had grown to recognize over 12 years of marriage. "I must have forgotten," I replied, my voice steady despite the earthquake occurring beneath my professional exterior. "Just like you forgot your wife yesterday." The silence that followed stretched longer than the 20 floors between our downtown apartment and the street below. Through our floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights twinkled like distant stars, each one representing someone else who was probably having a better evening than the one unfolding in my marriage. I could hear the restaurant noise in the background, the clink of expensive silverware against china, the murmur of business conversations that Jeffrey so desperately wanted to be part of. Before we continue with Nicole's journey, I want to thank you for joining me in exploring stories about financial boundaries and self-respect in relationships. If you believe that everyone deserves recognition for their contributions, please consider subscribing to support more empowering content. Now let's witness how this situation develops. But let me back up 6 hours to when this perfect Tuesday morning began with our usual choreographed dance of disconnection. I had risen at 5:30 a.m. as I did every weekday, moving through our luxury apartment with the practiced efficiency of someone who had perfected the art of productivity as emotional armor. Our 20th floor residence offered panoramic views of the downtown skyline, a testament to my corporate success that I had achieved through 15 years of climbing the marketing ladder at Fletcher & Associates, one of the city's most prestigious Fortune 500 companies. The kitchen was my domain by default. I had researched every appliance, from the professional-grade espresso machine that ground beans from a local roastery I had discovered, to the induction cooktop that heated our breakfast with scientific precision. Jeffrey sat at the marble island, laptop open, reviewing what he optimistically called his consulting proposals but which I privately recognized as variations on the same theme he had been pitching unsuccessfully for the past 3 years. "Good morning," I said, measuring coffee beans with the same attention to detail I applied to quarterly budget allocations at work. The ritual was soothing in its predictability. Premium coffee, steel-cut oats with organic honey, fresh fruit arranged on plates that had cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget. Jeffrey glanced up briefly. "Morning. I need to finish this proposal before my meeting with the Peterson Group." He returned his attention to the screen, fingers typing with the urgency of someone perpetually behind schedule. I nodded, adding cream to my coffee while calculating the monthly cost of his networking efforts. The Peterson Group meeting would inevitably require lunch at an expensive restaurant, charged to our joint account without discussion. His previous 3 meetings with potential clients had followed the same pattern, each promising to be the breakthrough that would establish his independent consulting practice. The morning light streamed through our windows, illuminating the carefully curated life we had constructed. Every piece of furniture bore my research fingerprints. The dining table had been selected after comparing dozens of options for durability and aesthetic appeal. The sectional sofa had been purchased during a weekend when Jeffrey was traveling, one of many decisions I had made alone despite sharing the space. My phone buzzed with notifications from my marketing team. The Morrison account needed final approval on their campaign strategy, and I had a board presentation scheduled for Thursday that could determine whether I received the promotion to senior vice president. The corporate world valued my strategic thinking, sought my analysis and compensated me accordingly. At Fletcher & Associates, I was Nicole Richardson, the marketing executive who had secured 3 major clients in the past year and consistently exceeded revenue targets. At home, I was simply Jeffrey's wife, the woman who ensured bills were paid and lifestyle maintained. The irony was not lost on me as I reviewed our banking app while finishing breakfast. The mortgage payment of $2,800 would automatically withdraw from my account the following day. Jeffrey's car payment of $650 for the luxury sedan he insisted was essential for client meetings. My car payment was $300 less for a practical vehicle I had purchased based on reliability ratings rather than image projection. Insurance premiums, utility bills, property taxes, maintenance fees for our building's amenities, all flowing seamlessly from my corporate salary while Jeffrey pursued his entrepreneurial dreams with the financial safety net I provided. I had never begrudged him this support, believing that marriage meant partnership and that my professional success should benefit both of us. But partnership implies mutual investment, shared decision-making, recognition of contribution. I should be home by 7, Jeffrey said, closing his laptop with the satisfaction of someone who had accomplished something meaningful. The Peterson meeting could run long if they're interested in the quarterly restructuring proposal. I nodded, mentally adjusting dinner plans while wondering if he would remember to ask about my day or my upcoming board presentation. The Morrison campaign success had been featured in our industry newsletter, a professional achievement that had required months of strategic planning and client relationship building. Jeffrey had read the article briefly and commented that it was nice before returning to his own concerns. His consulting business occupied the second bedroom of our apartment, a space I had helped design with built-in shelving and professional lighting. His business cards were printed on premium stock paper. His website featured professional photography I had arranged and paid for. His marketing materials bore the subtle influence of my professional expertise, advice given freely during late evening conversations about his client acquisition strategies. Yet when his family gathered for important celebrations, when his sister Christina announced major life milestones, when his mother organized holiday festivities, I discovered my role through absence rather than inclusion. The pattern had developed so gradually I had initially attributed it to oversight, to the natural chaos of busy lives and competing priorities. Yesterday's revelation about Christina's engagement dinner had crystallized years of accumulated evidence into undeniable clarity. Jeffrey had mentioned it casually, almost as an afterthought while I was preparing our evening meal. Oh, that was yesterday. Just immediate family. 7 words that had shattered my understanding of where I fit in the family structure I helped finance. The same family that contacted me directly when they needed professional advice for their business ventures. Christina had spent hours on the phone seeking marketing consultation for her boutique launch, expertise I had provided without charge while using my industry connections to secure favorable supplier arrangements. Jeffrey's brother Michael regularly sought my financial guidance for his investment decisions, trusting my corporate experience over his own limited business knowledge. I was family enough for unpaid labor, professional enough for business consultation, successful enough to subsidize their lifestyle choices, but not significant enough to merit inclusion in their celebrations. The realization had settled in my chest like a stone, heavy and cold and impossible to ignore. Now, standing in our kitchen with Jeffrey's panicked voice echoing through the phone speaker, I felt the satisfaction of someone who had finally stopped accepting treatment she did not deserve. The declined card was not an oversight or a billing error. It was the first consequence of a pattern that had gone unchallenged for too long. "Nicole, I need you to call the bank immediately," Jeffrey continued, his voice carrying the assumption that I would drop everything to solve his problem. "This is embarrassing. The Harrison team specifically chose this restaurant, and now they're questioning whether I can handle their account." I looked out at the city lights, at the life I had built through professional competence and financial discipline, and felt something shift inside me. Something that would not be shifted back. "I think you should handle this one yourself, Jeffrey." The phone hung silent between us, Jeffrey's panicked breathing echoing from the restaurant where his professional reputation was crumbling in real time. I could hear him shifting, probably looking around at the Harrison Industries team, searching for words that would salvage the situation. "Nicole, this isn't the time for games," he said finally, his voice dropping to that controlled whisper men use when they are furious but trying to maintain public composure. "I need you to fix this now." I ended the call. The quiet that followed felt different from our usual evening silences. This was not the comfortable quiet of two people sharing space while pursuing separate activities. This was the charged silence that comes after a line has been crossed, after words have been spoken that cannot be taken back. 3 weeks earlier that line had not existed. 3 weeks ago I had been genuinely excited when Christina called to announce her engagement to David, her voice bubbling with the kind of joy that makes you smile even when you are alone in your office reviewing quarterly projections. I had been finishing a presentation for the Morrison account when her call came through, and I had immediately pushed aside my marketing materials to focus entirely on her happiness. "Nicole, I have the most amazing news," she had said, and I could hear her practically vibrating with excitement through the phone. "David proposed last night at the botanical garden, right by the rose arbor where we had our first date. It was perfect, absolutely perfect." I had found myself genuinely moved by her enthusiasm, remembering my own engagement 12 years earlier when Jeffrey had proposed during a weekend trip to the mountains. We had been so certain then about our future together, so confident that our love could weather any challenge that life might present. "Christina, that is wonderful news," I had told her, already mentally shifting into celebration planning mode. "We need to do something special to mark this occasion. Have you thought about an engagement party? I know some excellent event planners if you want something elegant, or we could do something more intimate at home if that feels more personal." Her response had been warm but vague. "Oh, we are definitely planning something. David wants to keep it simple, but you know how these things grow. Jeffrey has some ideas about photographers and venues." That should have been my first warning sign. Jeffrey had ideas about photographers and venues for his sister's engagement party, but I was hearing about these plans secondhand through the bride-to-be rather than participating in the discussion directly. At the time, I had attributed this to Jeffrey's desire to surprise me with a well-organized celebration, or perhaps to his natural tendency to take charge of logistics when he felt passionate about something. 2 days later, Jeffrey had approached me in our home office where I was reviewing campaign materials for a client presentation. The space was technically his consulting headquarters, but I found myself working there most evenings because the second bedroom had better lighting and fewer distractions than our bedroom or living area. "I have been thinking about Christina's engagement party," he had said, settling into the chair across from my desk with the expression of someone who had been developing a comprehensive plan. "She deserves something really special, something memorable that captures this moment in her life." I had looked up from my laptop, pleased to see him so invested in his sister's happiness. "I completely agree. What did you have in mind?" "Professional photography," he had said immediately, as if he had been rehearsing this conversation. "Not just someone taking snapshots with their phone, but real professional documentation. Christina will want these photos for the rest of her life, and David's family is flying in from Seattle specifically for this celebration." The enthusiasm in his voice had been infectious, and I had found myself nodding along with his vision. "That sounds perfect. Do you have someone in mind, or should I reach out to some photographers I have worked with for corporate events?" "Actually, I already contacted Marcus Rivera. He does those beautiful wedding shoots you see in the lifestyle magazines. His work is incredible, really artistic and elegant. The only thing is his packages start at $1,500. Jeffrey had paused there, letting the number settle between us while studying my expression for any sign of resistance. This was a familiar dance in our marriage. He would present an expense as if it were already decided, then wait to see whether I would object to the financial commitment he had made on our behalf. $1,500 is substantial, I had said carefully, not wanting to dampen his enthusiasm for celebrating Christina but also trying to understand the scope of what we were committing to financially. "Is that for the engagement party specifically, or does that include other events like the wedding?" "Just the engagement party. But Nicole, think about how much this means to Christina. She has been waiting for this moment her entire adult life, and David is such a great guy. They deserve to have this milestone documented beautifully." He had been right, of course. Christina did deserve beautiful documentation of her engagement celebration. She had been dating David for 3 years, and their relationship had the kind of steady, supportive foundation that suggested they would build a strong marriage together. If professional photography would contribute to their happiness and create lasting memories, then $1,500 was a reasonable investment in family celebration. "Of course," I had said, already mentally adjusting our monthly budget to accommodate the expense. "Should I transfer the money to your account, or do you want me to pay Marcus directly?" The relief in Jeffrey's expression had been immediate and complete. "I will handle the payment arrangements. Marcus prefers to work with one point of contact for coordination purposes." I had nodded and returned my attention to the Morrison campaign materials, satisfied that we were contributing meaningfully to Christina's celebration. It was only later, much later, that I would recognize the careful way Jeffrey had structured that conversation. He had presented the expense as if it were a joint decision while actually seeking my financial approval for plans that had already been finalized without my input. The photographer payment had been the first crack in what I had believed was our partnership approach to family decisions. The second crack had come through my direct professional relationship with Jeffrey's family members, a pattern that had developed so gradually I had not initially recognized its significance. Christina had called me at my office the previous year, her voice carrying the nervous energy of someone about to make a significant request. "Nicole, I hope this is not too presumptuous, but I was wondering if I could ask for some professional advice about the boutique." Her boutique had been a dream she had been nurturing for years, a curated collection of contemporary women's clothing with an emphasis on sustainable materials and local designers. She had been working with a business loan officer to secure startup funding, but the bank had requested a comprehensive marketing strategy as part of her loan application. "I know you are incredibly busy with your own clients," she had continued, "but I was hoping you might be willing to look at my business plan and maybe offer some suggestions about the marketing approach. I would completely understand if you do not have time, but Jeffrey mentioned that you have experience with retail campaigns." I had been genuinely touched by her request and impressed by her thoughtful approach to launching her business. Too many entrepreneurs rushed into retail ventures without adequate planning, but Christina had clearly been researching her market and developing realistic projections for growth and profitability. "I would be happy to review your business plan," I had told her immediately. "Marketing strategy is exactly the kind of challenge I enjoy, and retail has some unique considerations that are worth exploring carefully." What followed had been 3 months of intensive consultation work. I had reviewed her target demographic analysis, helped refine her brand positioning, connected her with suppliers I knew from corporate partnerships, and even introduced her to a graphic designer who specialized in retail identity development. The work had been genuinely engaging, the kind of strategic thinking I enjoyed most about my professional role. Christina's boutique had launched successfully, exceeding her first-year revenue projections by 30%. She had credited my marketing guidance as essential to her success, and I had felt genuinely proud to have contributed to her entrepreneurial achievement. But I had never been invited to the boutique's launch party. I had learned about the celebration through social media posts, seeing photos of Jeffrey's entire family gathered in Christina's beautifully designed retail space, toasting her success with champagne and admiring the clothing displays I had helped conceptualize. When I had mentioned the party to Jeffrey later that evening, he had seemed genuinely surprised by my interest. "Oh, that was just a small thing for immediate family and the initial investors. Christina wanted to keep it low-key since the business is still so new." Immediate family and initial investors. Categories that apparently did not include the marketing executive who had donated months of professional expertise to ensure the business launch succeeded. The pattern had repeated itself with Jeffrey's brother Michael and his investment portfolio questions, with Jeffrey's mother Margaret and her small business tax concerns, with family friends who needed professional referrals for their own corporate challenges. I had become the family's unpaid business consultant, valued for my expertise and connections but somehow not significant enough to merit inclusion in their social celebrations. The realization had been building slowly, like water collecting behind a dam, until yesterday when the dam had finally cracked under pressure. I had been preparing dinner in our kitchen, chopping vegetables for a pasta sauce while Jeffrey reviewed emails on his phone. The domestic routine had felt comfortable and familiar, the kind of ordinary evening that constitutes the foundation of married life. "How did Christina's engagement dinner go?" I had asked casually, assuming we would be discussing details of the celebration I had helped finance through the photographer payment. Jeffrey had glanced up from his phone with the distracted expression of someone processing a question that required shifting mental gears. "Oh, that was yesterday. Just immediate family." 7 words that had shattered 12 years of assumptions about my place in the family structure I had been supporting financially and professionally. 7 words that had revealed the careful architecture of my exclusion from meaningful moments while my inclusion remained essential for meaningful contributions. I had continued chopping vegetables, the knife moving steadily through bell peppers and onions while I processed what Jeffrey had just revealed. Christina's engagement dinner had occurred without me. The celebration I had funded through professional photography had excluded the woman who had provided the funding. The immediate family who had gathered to toast Christina's engagement had not included the sister-in-law who had spent months ensuring Christina's business success. The knife had moved through the vegetables with mechanical precision while my mind had raced through months of similar exclusions, similar patterns of financial inclusion paired with social dismissal. Now, standing in our kitchen with Jeffrey's restaurant emergency creating a crisis of his own making, I felt the satisfaction of someone who had finally stopped pretending that patterns were coincidences. The city lights continued twinkling beyond our windows, indifferent to the collapse occurring in our marble-countered paradise. The city lights blurred as tears I had not realized were forming finally spilled over. I stood motionless in our kitchen, gripping the marble countertop with both hands as the full weight of Jeffrey's casual dismissal settled into my bones. The physical sensation was startling in its intensity, not the sharp pain of a sudden injury, but the deep, spreading ache of something fundamental shifting inside my chest. My breathing had become shallow, almost mechanical, as if my body was conserving energy for some crisis it sensed approaching. The familiar knot in my stomach that had appeared during Jeffrey's restaurant call had tightened into something resembling nausea, a churning discomfort that made me press one hand against my abdomen while the other maintained its death grip on the counter. This was not the first time I had felt this particular combination of dismissal and isolation, I realized with uncomfortable clarity. This was the same hollow sensation I had experienced when learning about Christina's boutique launch party through Instagram photos. The same quiet devastation that had followed discovering Jeffrey's college roommate had been included in family game nights I had never been invited to attend. The same pattern of exclusion that I had been unconsciously cataloging for months without acknowledging its significance. The difference tonight was that I could no longer pretend these exclusions were accidents or oversights. Jeffrey's matter-of-fact delivery, "Oh, that was yesterday. Just immediate family," had carried no guilt, no recognition that my absence might have been hurtful or even notable. The engagement dinner I had helped fund through professional photography had occurred without the woman who had provided the funding, and Jeffrey had not considered this worth mentioning until directly questioned. I found myself moving toward our home office without conscious decision, drawn to the space where productivity had always provided refuge from emotional complexity. The second bedroom had become my sanctuary over the years, initially intended as Jeffrey's consulting headquarters but gradually transformed into the place where I conducted the real business of our lives. Financial planning, tax preparation, insurance coordination, investment decisions. All the administrative work that kept our lifestyle functioning smoothly while remaining invisible to Jeffrey unless something went wrong. The desk chair welcomed me with familiar comfort as I settled into the space where I felt most competent and valuable. My laptop screen illuminated automatically, displaying the Morrison campaign materials I had been reviewing earlier. The client presentation was scheduled for Thursday morning, and the campaign strategy represented 6 months of strategic development that would likely secure my promotion to senior vice president. At Fletcher & Associates, my contributions were measured, acknowledged, and compensated appropriately. But tonight, even work could not provide its usual escape from personal disappointment. I opened our banking application with the methodical precision I typically reserved for quarterly business reviews. The numbers appeared on screen with stark clarity, each transaction representing a decision made, a priority established, a choice about where our resources would be allocated. The mortgage payment scheduled for automatic withdrawal tomorrow. Utility bills that maintained the comfort of our 20th floor apartment. Insurance premiums that protected our assets and health. Jeffrey's car payment, nearly twice the cost of my own vehicle, automatically charged to our joint account every month. His networking event fees, restaurant expenses for client meetings, conference registrations for professional development opportunities, all funded through my corporate salary without corresponding consultation about strategic planning or expected return on investment. The photographer payment for Christina's engagement party appeared in our transaction history. $1,500 transferred to Marcus Rivera's account the day after Jeffrey's enthusiastic presentation about professional documentation. I stared at that line item for several minutes, calculating not just its financial impact but its emotional cost. $1,500 to document an event I was never intended to attend. Professional photography to capture memories I was not considered significant enough to create. As I scrolled through months of financial data, a different kind of accounting began taking shape in my mind. Not just tracking expenses and income, but calculating the emotional economics of my relationships. How much had I contributed to Jeffrey's family celebrations compared to how often I had been included in meaningful participation? How many hours of professional consultation had I provided to family members compared to how many social invitations I had received? Christina's boutique consultation alone represented approximately 40 hours of strategic planning, market analysis, and supplier coordination. At my corporate consulting rate, that work would have been valued at $12,000. But I had provided it freely, willingly, because I believed family relationships operated on principles of mutual support rather than transactional exchange. The boutique launch party photos on social media had featured Jeffrey's entire extended family celebrating Christina's success. Parents, siblings, cousins, even family friends I recognized from holiday gatherings. The business plan I had helped develop was being celebrated by people who had contributed encouragement and emotional support, while I, who had contributed actual professional expertise essential to the venture's success, had not been considered worth inviting. Jeffrey's brother Michael had contacted me directly 6 months earlier seeking investment advice for his retirement portfolio. I had spent an entire Saturday afternoon reviewing his financial situation, researching fund options, and creating a diversified investment strategy that had already generated significant returns. When Michael had celebrated his portfolio performance at Jeffrey's birthday dinner, I had learned about the gathering through Jeffrey's casual mention 2 days after it occurred. The pattern was undeniable once I allowed myself to examine it objectively. I was valuable enough for unpaid professional labor, reliable enough for financial support, knowledgeable enough for business consultation. But I was not significant enough for social inclusion, not important enough for advance notice of family events, not worthy enough to merit consideration when celebration guest lists were created. I had become the family's unpaid contractor, hired for specific services, compensated through assumed gratitude, dismissed when the work was complete. The realization struck me with the force of professional clarity applied to personal relationships. In business, I would never accept such an arrangement. No client would expect months of strategic consultation without appropriate compensation. No professional relationship would survive systematic exclusion from project completion celebrations. No vendor would tolerate being essential for service delivery but peripheral for success recognition. Yet in my marriage, in my family relationships, I had been accepting precisely this treatment for years without recognizing its fundamental dysfunction. I leaned back in the desk chair, studying our apartment through the office doorway. Every piece of furniture, every appliance, every decorative element bore evidence of my research and decision-making. The sectional sofa I had selected after comparing durability ratings and warranty options. The dining table I had purchased during a weekend when Jeffrey was traveling, one of countless decisions I had made independently despite sharing the space. Even our home reflected my supporting character status. I was responsible for creating and maintaining the environment where Jeffrey could pursue his consulting aspirations, but I was not considered an equal partner in decisions about how that environment was used for social purposes. The kitchen where I had prepared countless meals for family gatherings that occurred without advance consultation about my schedule or preferences. The dining room where Jeffrey hosted his college roommate for dinner parties I discovered through cleanup evidence the following day. The living room where family members visited for business advice sessions that began and ended without social conversation or personal interest in my life beyond my professional expertise. I had been funding and facilitating Jeffrey's social and professional life while occupying an increasingly marginal role in both domains. My contributions had enabled his networking efforts, family celebrations, and relationship maintenance activities, but my presence at the events those contributions made possible was considered optional or even unwelcome. The supporting character realization carried a bitter clarity that was both devastating and oddly liberating. Supporting characters exist to advance other people's storylines. They provide essential services, create necessary conditions for main character success, and disappear when their utility has been exhausted. They are defined by their function rather than their intrinsic value, appreciated for their contributions rather than their company. For 12 years, I had been Jeffrey's supporting character, reliable for bill payment and lifestyle maintenance but insufficiently interesting to merit leading role consideration in his family narrative. Tonight, sitting in our home office surrounded by evidence of my financial contributions and professional competence, I understood that supporting characters have one significant advantage over main characters. They can choose to leave the story entirely. The city lights continued sparkling beyond our windows, each one representing someone else who might be having a very different evening than the one unfolding in our marble-countered paradise. Someone who was valued for their presence as much as their contributions. Someone who was included in celebrations they helped create. Someone whose relationships operated on principles of mutual respect rather than convenient utility. I closed the banking application and opened a new document on my laptop, the cursor blinking steadily as I began to consider what a different story might look like. The cursor blinked steadily on the blank document as memories began surfacing with uncomfortable precision. I found myself typing dates and events, creating a chronological record of occasions where my financial contributions had been essential but my physical presence had been deemed optional. The exercise felt like conducting a forensic audit of my own life, examining evidence I had previously dismissed as isolated incidents. Last Christmas emerged as the most glaring example. I had coordinated the entire holiday celebration at our apartment, researching caterers, selecting wine pairings, arranging floral displays that transformed our living space into something worthy of a magazine feature. The dinner had cost nearly $3,000, charged to my credit card in increments over 2 weeks as Jeffrey made executive decisions about menu upgrades and additional guests without consulting my preferences or availability. The guest list had expanded from immediate family to include Jeffrey's extended cousins, college friends who were visiting the city, and several neighbors from his childhood neighborhood whom I had met perhaps twice in 12 years. I had discovered the final headcount through Jeffrey's casual mention that we would need additional chairs, delivered while I was reviewing invoices for specialty ingredients I had never agreed to purchase. During the celebration itself, I had spent the evening managing kitchen coordination and ensuring serving dishes remained full while guests gathered in our living room discussing topics that somehow never included my professional achievements or personal interests. When Jeffrey's cousin had asked about my work at Fletcher & Associates, Jeffrey had provided a summary of my role that minimized my responsibilities and eliminated any mention of my recent promotion opportunities. The following week, Jeffrey had mentioned how much his family had enjoyed the evening and appreciated our hospitality. Our hospitality, as if he had contributed equally to the planning, preparation, and financial investment that had made the celebration possible. When I had suggested that future holiday gatherings might benefit from advanced discussion about guest lists and budget parameters, Jeffrey had dismissed my concerns as unnecessary complications that would diminish the spontaneous family atmosphere. Spring had brought the family vacation to Martha's Vineyard, another event where my credit card had been essential but my schedule had been secondary. Jeffrey's parents had selected the dates based on availability of their preferred rental property, then informed Jeffrey that we were expected to participate in the week-long celebration of his father's retirement. The rental cost alone had been $4,500, automatically charged to our account along with airfare for all participants and restaurant reservations for nightly dinner celebrations. I had learned about the vacation timing through Jeffrey's request that I clear my schedule for the designated week, delivered as if my professional commitments were easily adjustable accessories rather than carefully planned obligations with significant consequences for client relationships and project timelines. When I had explained that the proposed dates conflicted with crucial presentations for 2 major accounts, Jeffrey had suggested that I could join the family for a long weekend rather than the full week. The compromise had satisfied no one. I had attended 3 days of family activities where conversation consistently returned to shared memories from decades of joint experiences I had not witnessed, inside jokes that required extensive background explanation, and reminiscences about Jeffrey's childhood that excluded me entirely from meaningful participation. My shortened visit had been treated as evidence of my insufficient commitment to family relationships rather than recognition of the professional sacrifices I had made to participate at all. Most revealing had been the inclusion of Brian Matthews, Jeffrey's college roommate who had recently moved to the city and reconnected through social media. Brian had been invited to join family dinners within 6 weeks of his relocation, included in weekend activities with an enthusiasm that contrasted sharply with the reluctant accommodation of my schedule constraints. During game nights at Jeffrey's parents' house, Brian's opinions about sports and politics were solicited and valued while my contributions to conversation were politely acknowledged before discussion returned to topics where my perspective was considered irrelevant. The comparison was particularly striking because Brian represented exactly the kind of casual acquaintance that families typically include gradually, after establishing comfort and compatibility through repeated interactions. Yet he had been embraced immediately and completely, while I, after 12 years of marriage and consistent financial contribution to family activities, remained peripheral to their social dynamics. At Fletcher & Associates, my professional standing created an entirely different dynamic. Colleagues sought my strategic input on challenging accounts. Junior executives requested mentoring sessions that could advance their career development. The board of directors had specifically requested my analysis of market expansion opportunities, recognizing my research capabilities and presentation skills as valuable assets for corporate planning. Client relationships reflected genuine professional respect. The Morrison account had specifically retained our firm based on my track record with similar marketing challenges. The Harrison Industries team had mentioned my reputation within the industry when explaining their decision to work with Fletcher & Associates rather than competing firms. My success generated recognition, advancement opportunities, and financial compensation that reflected the value of my contributions. The contrast with my personal relationships was becoming impossible to ignore. At work, my expertise was valued enough to justify significant consulting fees. At home, identical expertise was assumed to be freely available without consideration of time investment or professional opportunity costs. Corporate clients respected my schedule and planned meetings around my availability. Jeffrey's family scheduled events based on their convenience and expected me to adjust my commitments to accommodate their preferences. Professional relationships operated on principles of mutual benefit and acknowledged exchange. Personal relationships, apparently, operated on principles of assumed obligation and unilateral accommodation. Christina's boutique success story represented the most comprehensive example of this disparity between professional value and personal recognition. The consultation work had extended far beyond initial business plan review into comprehensive strategic development that would have constituted a significant corporate engagement if conducted for a paying client. I had begun with market analysis that examined demographic trends, competitor positioning, and seasonal purchasing patterns specific to contemporary women's clothing with sustainable materials emphasis. The research had required interviews with industry experts, analysis of retail location foot traffic patterns, and evaluation of supplier relationships that could provide quality materials at competitive pricing. Brand development had involved extensive collaboration with Christina on positioning strategy that would differentiate her boutique from established competitors while appealing to environmentally conscious consumers willing to invest in higher-priced sustainable options. We had developed messaging frameworks, visual identity guidelines, and marketing materials that reflected sophisticated understanding of target demographic preferences and purchasing behaviors. Supplier negotiations had leveraged my corporate relationships to secure favorable terms with textile manufacturers and independent designers who typically required substantial minimum orders or extended payment schedules. My professional reputation had enabled Christina to establish credit relationships and inventory arrangements that would have been impossible for a startup retail operation without established business history. The grand opening event had featured local fashion bloggers, environmental advocacy organization representatives, and potential customers who had been attracted through social media campaigns I had designed and implemented using marketing strategies developed through years of corporate campaign experience. The event had generated immediate sales that exceeded Christina's optimistic projections and established her boutique as a recognized destination for sustainable fashion. Christina's social media posts from the launch celebration had shown her entire extended family gathered in the beautifully merchandised space, raising champagne toasts to her entrepreneurial success while surrounded by clothing displays and marketing materials that reflected my strategic input. Jeffrey's parents had offered emotional speeches about Christina's determination and vision. Her siblings had praised her courage for pursuing independent business ownership. Family friends had celebrated her achievement as evidence of the family's entrepreneurial spirit. My contribution to that success had been acknowledged privately through Christina's grateful phone calls and thank you messages, but my presence at the public celebration had not been considered necessary or appropriate. The marketing executive who had donated months of professional expertise to ensure the business launch succeeded had been excluded from witnessing the fruits of that labor. The irony was particularly sharp because Christina's boutique had become profitable ahead of schedule, generating returns that validated every strategic recommendation I had provided. The business model we had developed together was succeeding precisely as projected, creating ongoing income that would support Christina's lifestyle and career aspirations for years to come. Yet the celebration of that success had occurred without the person whose professional competence had made it possible. I saved the document I had been creating, a comprehensive record of financial contributions paired with social exclusions that painted an undeniable picture of systematic marginalization. The pattern was too consistent to represent coincidence and too deliberate to reflect oversight. Jeffrey's family had structured their relationships with me according to clear but unspoken rules. My professional expertise was valuable enough to justify extensive unpaid consultation. My financial resources were reliable enough to support their lifestyle enhancement and celebration activities. But my personal company was not sufficiently interesting to merit inclusion in the social experiences those contributions made possible. I was the family's preferred vendor, compensated through assumed gratitude and dismissed when services were no longer required. The realization carried a clarity that was both devastating and oddly empowering. Vendors, unlike family members, have the option to decline contracts that do not serve their interests. They can also revise their terms of service without advance notice. The clock on my laptop screen read 11:47 p.m. when I heard Jeffrey's key in the front door, followed by the familiar sounds of someone trying to move quietly through our apartment while slightly intoxicated from networking event cocktails. His Thursday evening routine had become as predictable as quarterly earnings reports. Departure at 6:30 with complaints about the expense of impressing potential clients. Return after 11 with optimistic assessments of new business prospects that rarely materialized into actual contracts. Tonight his footsteps paused outside the office door. I could sense him debating whether to interrupt my work session or proceed directly to our bedroom. The decision apparently favored avoiding potentially uncomfortable conversation about his restaurant embarrassment, because the footsteps continued down the hallway followed by the soft click of our bedroom door closing. Perfect. Thursday evenings had become my most productive planning time precisely because Jeffrey's absence guaranteed uninterrupted focus on complex projects requiring sustained concentration. Corporate strategy development, quarterly budget analysis, long-term investment planning. All the detailed work that formed the foundation of professional success but demanded several hours of uninterrupted mental engagement. Tonight's project would be more personal than any quarterly report, but it would require the same methodical approach and comprehensive analysis that had earned my reputation for strategic thinking at Fletcher & Associates. I opened a new spreadsheet and began itemizing our monthly expenses with the precision I typically applied to client campaign budgets. Housing costs appeared first. The $2,800 mortgage payment that represented the largest single expense in our financial structure. Utilities averaged $340 monthly, including internet service that supported both my corporate work and Jeffrey's consulting activities. Property taxes and building maintenance fees added another $600 monthly to our housing obligations. These represented legitimate joint expenses that I would continue managing regardless of changes to our financial architecture. Married couples sharing living space reasonably split costs for shelter, utilities, and basic household maintenance. The apartment served both our professional needs and provided shared benefits that justified shared responsibility for core expenses. Transportation costs required more nuanced analysis. My car payment of $420 monthly supported a reliable vehicle selected based on safety ratings and maintenance costs rather than image considerations. Jeffrey's car payment of $650 reflected his preference for luxury features and premium brand positioning that enhanced his consulting practice's perceived success level. The distinction between necessity and professional enhancement would become crucial for budgetary allocation decisions. Insurance premiums, grocery expenses, and basic household supplies represented another category of shared obligations. Health insurance through my corporate benefits plan covered both of us at minimal additional cost. Property insurance protected our joint assets. Food purchases and household maintenance items served mutual needs that justified continued joint funding. But discretionary expenses revealed the pattern of unilateral decision-making that had characterized our financial relationship for years. Restaurant meals averaged nearly $800 monthly, primarily driven by Jeffrey's client entertainment expenses and networking dinner obligations. These business development costs had never generated corresponding revenue increases for his consulting practice, yet they continued expanding without discussion about return on investment expectations. Clothing purchases had reached an average of $400 monthly, again driven primarily by Jeffrey's perception that successful consultants required extensive professional wardrobes for client meetings and industry events. His networking event fees, conference registrations, and professional development expenses added another $300 monthly to our discretionary spending. Gift purchases for family celebrations had averaged $250 monthly over the past year, including the photographer payment for Christina's engagement party, holiday presents I had never participated in selecting, and birthday gifts for family members who had not acknowledged my own birthday except through Jeffrey's representation. The mathematical clarity was sobering. Our joint household obligations totaled approximately $4,000 monthly, reasonable expenses for our income level and lifestyle preferences. But discretionary spending had reached nearly $2,000 monthly, controlled entirely by Jeffrey's preferences and professional aspirations without corresponding consultation about priorities or expected benefits. More significantly, the discretionary expenses consistently supported Jeffrey's professional and social activities while my own preferences and professional needs received minimal consideration in budget allocation decisions. My professional development opportunities were funded through corporate reimbursement programs rather than household budget allocation, despite generating the income that made Jeffrey's extensive networking activities financially possible. I opened our online banking platform and began researching account options for financial restructuring. Individual checking accounts would provide complete autonomy over discretionary spending while maintaining joint responsibility for agreed-upon household expenses. Automatic transfer capabilities would enable seamless funding of shared obligations without requiring ongoing coordination or discussion about routine expenses. The process required careful attention to legal implications and asset protection considerations. Married couples in our state maintained certain joint property rights regardless of account structures, but individual accounts would establish clear boundaries around discretionary spending decisions and eliminate unauthorized access to funds designated for specific purposes. I calculated precise amounts needed for household expense coverage, adding reasonable buffer amounts for unexpected costs and seasonal variations in utility expenses. The remaining portion of my income would transfer to individual accounts where spending decisions would reflect my own priorities rather than Jeffrey's assumptions about automatic availability of funds for his professional and social activities. Documentation would be essential for establishing clear boundaries and tracking compliance with the new financial architecture. I created spreadsheet templates for categorizing expenses as either joint obligations or individual discretionary spending, with specific criteria for determining appropriate allocation of ambiguous costs like shared meals that might serve both personal and professional purposes. Friday morning would require discreet consultation with my financial advisor and family law attorney to ensure that restructuring plans complied with legal requirements and protected my interests appropriately. The conversation would need to address asset protection strategies, joint debt responsibilities, and potential implications for future financial planning, including retirement accounts and investment portfolios that had been funded primarily through my income. Professional consultation felt crucial because the financial restructuring represented more than simple convenience or control issues. This was comprehensive boundary establishment that would affect every aspect of our marriage's economic foundation. The changes needed to be legally sound, practically implementable, and strategically positioned to achieve intended outcomes without creating unintended consequences. My corporate experience with vendor contract negotiations provided useful framework for these personal financial boundaries. Successful business relationships required clearly defined terms, mutual agreement about expectations, and consequences for non-compliance with established parameters. Personal relationships apparently could benefit from similar structural clarity. The legal consultation would also address timeline considerations for implementing changes. Immediate account separation would provide maximum impact but might trigger premature confrontation before I had fully prepared for potential responses. Gradual implementation could minimize initial resistance but might allow time for countermeasures that could complicate the restructuring process. Asset protection strategies required particular attention given the significant income disparity between Jeffrey and myself. My corporate salary represented the primary funding source for our lifestyle, while Jeffrey's consulting income remained irregular and insufficient for maintaining current expense levels. Protecting my financial resources from unlimited access needed to balance appropriate spousal support with reasonable boundaries around discretionary spending. The attorney consultation would need to address potential divorce implications as well, though I had not yet determined whether financial boundary establishment represented marriage preservation strategy or preparation for potential separation. Either outcome required protecting my economic interests and ensuring that years of financial contribution to joint lifestyle did not create unfavorable legal precedents for future asset division discussions. By 2:30 a.m., I had created comprehensive financial restructuring plans that would establish clear boundaries while maintaining appropriate support for legitimate joint obligations. The documentation included detailed budgets, implementation timelines, legal consultation schedules, and contingency plans for various response scenarios. The strategic planning process had provided the same satisfaction as successful campaign development for challenging corporate clients. Complex problems required systematic analysis, creative solutions, and careful implementation planning. The emotional components of personal relationships might complicate execution compared to straightforward business negotiations, but the fundamental principles of strategic change management remained applicable. I saved all documents to encrypted files on my personal laptop, separate from any shared devices or cloud storage platforms that Jeffrey could access. The financial restructuring would proceed according to my timeline and strategic preferences rather than his comfort level with changes to established patterns. Friday's legal consultations would provide final confirmation of implementation strategies. Then Jeffrey would discover that vendors, unlike family members, maintain the right to revise their terms of service whenever current arrangements no longer serve their interests. The city lights had dimmed considerably during my planning session, but I felt more alert and focused than I had in months. Strategic thinking, it appeared, was excellent medicine for emotional clarity. Friday morning arrived with the crisp efficiency I had planned for implementation of my financial restructuring. While Jeffrey remained asleep, recovering from his networking event optimism and cocktail consumption, I executed the account separation with the methodical precision of a corporate restructuring project. New banking relationships established, automatic transfers configured, credit card authorizations revised. By 8:30 a.m., the financial architecture of our marriage had been fundamentally altered without a single conversation or confrontation. The legal consultations proceeded exactly as anticipated. My financial advisor confirmed that individual account management represented sound asset protection strategy, while the family law attorney verified that married individuals maintained complete authority over income earned through their individual professional activities. The restructuring was legally defensible, strategically sound, and immediately implementable. Jeffrey discovered none of these changes during his Friday routine of reviewing potential client communications and preparing for weekend networking opportunities. The transition period would last exactly 5 days. Sufficient time for him to assume normal access to discretionary funding while I observed his spending patterns under the new constraints. Tuesday evening brought the Harrison Industries dinner that would test the effectiveness of my financial boundary establishment. Jeffrey had spent considerable time preparing for this client meeting, researching the company's expansion plans and developing consulting proposals that he believed would demonstrate his strategic capabilities. The Harrison Industries team represented exactly the type of corporate client that could establish his consulting practice as a legitimate business rather than an expensive hobby funded through my corporate salary. "This could be the breakthrough we have been waiting for," he had explained while selecting his most expensive suit for the dinner meeting. Harrison Industries is considering comprehensive organizational restructuring that could require months of consulting work. If I can demonstrate the right strategic thinking tonight, this could transform our entire financial situation. Our financial situation. The phrase had struck me as particularly ironic, given that our financial situation consisted primarily of my income subsidizing his professional aspirations while he maintained minimal awareness of the actual costs associated with his business development efforts. The restaurant he had selected for entertaining the Harrison Industries team epitomized his approach to client relationships. Excessive expense intended to project success and sophistication without consideration of return on investment calculations. Chez Laurent commanded premium prices for French cuisine served in an atmosphere designed to impress business associates who were evaluating potential service providers based on perceived financial stability and professional competence. Jeffrey's confidence about the evening had been evident in his departure preparations. Fresh haircut from the expensive salon downtown, premium cologne applied with the enthusiasm of someone anticipating professional triumph, briefcase containing customized presentation materials that had been printed at significant cost through a specialty business services company. The call came at 8:47 p.m., precisely as I had been reviewing quarterly projections for the Morrison account renewal. Jeffrey's voice carried that particular combination of shock and panic that accompanies unexpected public embarrassment in professional settings. "Nicole, my card just got declined in front of the Harrison Industries team," he said without preamble, his voice strained with the effort of maintaining composure while surrounded by potential clients. "The waiter is standing here waiting for payment, and I need you to call the bank immediately to resolve whatever billing error has occurred." I could hear the restaurant ambience in the background, the subtle clatter of expensive silverware, the murmur of business conversations conducted over wines that probably cost more than our weekly grocery budget. The Harrison Industries team was undoubtedly observing this payment difficulty and drawing conclusions about Jeffrey's financial management capabilities and professional reliability. "That sounds frustrating," I replied, maintaining the same conversational tone Jeffrey had used when explaining that Christina's engagement dinner had occurred without me. "But I am certain you can handle the situation appropriately." "Nicole, this is not the time for whatever point you are trying to make," Jeffrey said, his voice dropping to the urgent whisper men use when they are desperate but trying to avoid public scenes. "I need you to resolve this billing problem immediately so I can salvage this client relationship." The desperation in his voice was palpable, and I recognized the exact sensation he was experiencing. The horrifying realization that you have been excluded from something essential while everyone around you witnesses your irrelevance. The uncomfortable awareness that your assumed resources are not actually available when you need them most. The dawning understanding that your position in the social hierarchy is far more precarious than you had previously realized. "I must have forgotten to handle that," I said, allowing my words to mirror the casual dismissiveness he had demonstrated when explaining my exclusion from family celebrations I had funded. "Just like you forgot your wife existed when planning your family gatherings." The silence that followed stretched longer than the distance between our apartment and the restaurant where Jeffrey was discovering the consequences of taking financial support for granted. I could imagine him standing near the payment station, phone pressed against his ear, while the Harrison Industries team observed his inability to conclude their business dinner successfully. When he spoke again, his voice had acquired the strained quality of someone who was beginning to understand that their emergency was not automatically everyone else's priority. "Nicole, whatever issues you believe we need to address can be discussed at home. Right now I need immediate assistance resolving a billing error that is damaging my professional reputation." "There is no billing error, Jeffrey," I said, maintaining the calm tone I used for delivering quarterly performance reviews to underperforming team members. "There has been a strategic revision to our financial arrangements. Your discretionary spending now requires advanced discussion rather than automatic approval." I could hear him breathing heavily, processing this information while standing in an expensive restaurant surrounded by potential clients who were witnessing his financial difficulties firsthand. The Harrison Industries team had probably never experienced a consultant who could not manage restaurant payment without calling home for authorization. "This is insane, Nicole. You cannot seriously be doing this to me right now, in front of the most important client meeting I have had all year." "I am not doing anything to you," I replied, opening the spreadsheet document I had prepared specifically for this conversation. "I am finally implementing appropriate boundaries around discretionary expenses that have been funded without consultation for months. Your client entertainment costs have averaged nearly $400 per week over the past 6 months, Jeffrey. That represents $20,000 annually in business development expenses that have generated exactly $0 in contracted revenue." The mathematical precision of my analysis appeared to shock him into momentary silence. Jeffrey had never calculated the cumulative cost of his networking and client entertainment activities because those expenses had been automatically funded through my income without requiring justification or performance measurement. Since January you have spent $1,200 on networking event fees, $800 on professional conference registrations, and nearly $3,000 on client dinners that have resulted in precisely 0 signed consulting contracts. I continued, reading from my comprehensive spending analysis. Your business development ROI is negative 100%, funded entirely through my corporate salary while I work late to earn the money you are spending on professional activities that consistently fail to generate corresponding income. The restaurant sounds in the background had grown quieter, suggesting that Jeffrey was moving away from his table to conduct this conversation with some privacy. The Harrison Industries team was probably discussing his payment difficulties and drawing unfavorable conclusions about his business management capabilities. Nicole, we can discuss budgeting concerns later, but right now I need you to authorize payment for this dinner so I can maintain my professional credibility with potential clients who could transform our financial situation. Our financial situation is quite stable, Jeffrey. My financial situation provides comprehensive support for all legitimate household expenses while maintaining healthy savings and investment growth. Your financial situation, however, appears to require significant restructuring. I could hear him struggling to control his breathing, probably recognizing that this conversation was not proceeding according to his expectations and that the Harrison Industries team was witnessing his inability to resolve a simple payment transaction. What exactly do you expect me to do right now, Nicole? The waiter is waiting for payment. My potential clients are watching this entire situation unfold, and you are delivering financial lectures instead of helping me maintain the professional relationship that could benefit both of us. I expect you to handle your business expenses using your business resources, Jeffrey. Revolutionary concept, I realize, but successful consultants typically maintain sufficient capital to cover their operational costs rather than relying on spousal subsidies for basic business functions. The satisfaction I felt delivering that response was profound and entirely justified. For the first time in our marriage, Jeffrey was experiencing the consequences of assumptions about automatic financial support that he had never questioned or appreciated. The Harrison Industries dinner was concluding with Jeffrey learning that financial resources require respect, consultation, and appropriate boundaries rather than unlimited access based on marital assumption. His professional reputation was being determined by his own financial planning capabilities rather than my automatic accommodation of his business development fantasies. The lesson was proceeding exactly as I had strategically planned, but Jeffrey apparently required reinforcements for his counterattack. Saturday morning arrived with the distinctive sound of a car door slamming in our building's parking garage with unnecessary force, followed by the aggressive buzz of our apartment intercom system. Through our 20th floor windows, I could observe Michael climbing out of his leased BMW sedan, wearing the kind of designer athletic wear that cost more than most people's monthly utility bills. His arrival had clearly been coordinated with Jeffrey during whatever crisis management conversation they had conducted following the Harrison Industries dinner debacle. Michael's body language suggested he was approaching our apartment with the righteous indignation of someone who had been appointed family spokesperson for addressing my inappropriate financial boundary establishment. When I opened our door, Michael pushed past me without invitation, carrying himself with the presumptuous authority of someone who believed his opinion about my marriage carried weight despite never having contributed meaningfully to our household or demonstrated any understanding of our financial dynamics. Nicole, we need to have a serious conversation about what happened Tuesday night, he announced, settling into our living room sectional sofa as if he owned it rather than merely benefiting from the lifestyle my income had made possible for his brother. Jeffrey told me about your little power play with the credit card situation, and frankly, I am disappointed in your behavior. The condescending tone was particularly galling coming from someone whose financial contributions to family relationships consisted primarily of borrowing money from Jeffrey that was never repaid and attending celebrations funded through my corporate salary while offering unsolicited opinions about subjects he had never studied or experienced personally. Michael, I replied, maintaining the professional composure I used for managing difficult client relationships. I appreciate your concern for Jeffrey's well-being, but our financial arrangements are private matters between married partners rather than topics requiring extended family input or approval. He waved dismissively, apparently considering my perspective irrelevant to the important business of correcting my inappropriate attitude toward marital obligations. Look, Nicole, I understand that you women sometimes get emotional about things and make decisions based on feelings rather than practical considerations. But you cannot seriously expect Jeffrey to manage his consulting business without reliable access to funding for client development activities. The casual sexism was breathtaking in its assumptions about my professional competence and decision-making capabilities. Michael apparently believed that my strategic financial restructuring represented emotional reactivity rather than calculated business management applied to personal relationships that had been operating according to dysfunctional parameters for years. That is an interesting perspective, I said, walking to our kitchen to prepare coffee while Michael continued his lecture about proper wifely behavior. Tell me, when was the last time you provided financial support for Jeffrey's consulting business development, or for any family member's professional activities? The question appeared to catch him off guard, probably because no one had ever challenged his authority to offer opinions about financial arrangements he had never participated in creating or maintaining. That is not the point, Nicole. Jeffrey is trying to build something meaningful for your future together, and you are sabotaging his efforts over some petty disagreement about communication or inclusion or whatever feminist agenda you have been reading about online. I returned to the living room carrying 2 cups of coffee, noting that Michael had made himself completely comfortable in furniture I had researched and purchased while he had been pursuing whatever expensive hobbies currently occupied his attention span. Actually, Michael, that is precisely the point, I said, settling into the chair across from the sofa where he was dispensing marital advice based on his extensive experience with failed relationships and financial irresponsibility. Jeffrey's business development efforts have been funded entirely through my corporate income for 3 years without generating corresponding revenue or consulting contracts. The Harrison Industries dinner represented the latest example of expensive client entertainment that produces no measurable return on investment. Michael's expression suggested he had not expected our conversation to include specific financial data or performance analysis, probably assuming that emotional appeals about family loyalty would be sufficient to restore Jeffrey's unlimited access to discretionary spending. You cannot put a price on relationship building, Nicole. Sometimes these business connections take time to develop into actual contracts, but that does not mean the networking investments are worthless. 3 years of networking investments totaling approximately $60,000 in aggregate expenses, I replied, opening my laptop to display the comprehensive spending analysis I had prepared for exactly this type of conversation. $0 in signed consulting contracts. 0 return on investment. If this were a corporate marketing campaign, it would have been terminated for poor performance after 6 months of similar results. The mathematical precision appeared to shock Michael into temporary silence, probably because he had never considered Jeffrey's consulting aspirations from a business performance perspective rather than emotional support framework. Furthermore, I continued, your concern about Jeffrey's professional development would be more compelling if it were accompanied by your own financial contributions to family business ventures or household expenses. When did you last provide monetary support for family celebrations, business development costs, or shared household obligations? Michael shifted uncomfortably, clearly recognizing that his financial contributions to family relationships consisted primarily of consumption rather than production, attendance rather than organization, opinions rather than resources. I contribute in other ways, Nicole. Not everything valuable can be measured in dollars and cents. Such as? I asked, genuinely curious about what non-monetary contributions Michael believed justified his opinions about my financial decision-making and marital obligations. The silence stretched longer than our apartment lease agreement, filled only with the ambient sounds of Saturday morning traffic 20 floors below while Michael struggled to identify specific examples of his valuable contributions to family relationships or Jeffrey's business success. I provide emotional support and encouragement, he finally said, apparently considering cheerleading equivalent to financial investment in terms of relationship maintenance and business development assistance. That is admirable, I replied, maintaining the same tone I used for acknowledging junior colleagues who had mistaken good intentions for meaningful performance. However, emotional support does not pay for client dinners, networking event fees, professional conference registrations, or household expenses that enable Jeffrey to pursue consulting activities without generating corresponding income. Michael's discomfort was becoming increasingly visible as he confronted the uncomfortable reality that his parasitic relationship to everyone else's financial generosity had never been reciprocated through his own meaningful contributions to family welfare or business development. The point is, Nicole, marriage requires compromise and support for each other's dreams and aspirations. You cannot just cut off Jeffrey's access to resources when he is trying to build something important for both of your futures. You are absolutely correct, I agreed, surprising him with my concurrence before delivering the strategic clarification that would redefine the entire conversation. Marriage does require compromise and support for each other's dreams and aspirations. That is precisely why I spent 3 years providing unlimited financial support for Jeffrey's consulting business while receiving minimal consultation about spending priorities or strategic planning decisions. I leaned forward, applying the same focused attention I used for crucial client presentations where contract renewals depended on comprehensive performance justification. But support requires reciprocity, Michael. Respect demands acknowledgement of contributions. Partnership necessitates inclusion in decision-making processes that affect shared resources and family relationships. Jeffrey's consulting dreams have been subsidized through my corporate income for 36 months while I was systematically excluded from family celebrations that used my money for funding but considered my presence optional for participation. Michael's expression suggested he was beginning to understand that this conversation was not proceeding according to his expectations about feminine emotionality overwhelming practical business considerations. From this point forward, I continued, access to my financial resources will require demonstration of respect for my contributions, inclusion in planning processes that affect shared expenses, and reciprocal consideration of my professional needs and social preferences. These are standard business relationship parameters, not unreasonable personal demands. The paradigm shift was clearly causing Michael significant cognitive discomfort as he realized that his traditional assumptions about family hierarchies and gender roles were being challenged by someone with superior financial leverage and strategic thinking capabilities. This is ridiculous, Nicole. You are treating your marriage like some kind of corporate negotiation rather than a loving partnership between people who are supposed to support each other unconditionally. Unconditional support, I repeated, testing the phrase for logical consistency with actual relationship dynamics I had experienced. Michael, when was the last time anyone in Jeffrey's family provided unconditional support for my professional achievements, personal interests, or social preferences without expecting corresponding financial contributions or practical services in return? The question hung in our living room air like expensive perfume, present and impossible to ignore while Michael searched for examples that would support his theoretical framework about family relationships operating according to principles of mutual generosity rather than transactional exchange. His departure occurred with considerably less confidence than his arrival had demonstrated. The unprecedented experience of being held accountable for his opinions about financial arrangements he had never contributed to or fully understood had clearly shaken his assumptions about family authority structures and gender-based decision-making hierarchies. As Michael returned to his leased luxury sedan, probably preparing to report back to Jeffrey about my unreasonable demands for respect and reciprocity in marriage, I recognized that the family structure was being forced to confront their financial dependence on someone they had systematically undervalued for years. The message would spread through extended family networks with the efficiency of quarterly earnings reports, carrying news that their unpaid consultant and financial facilitator had established new terms of service that prioritized mutual respect over convenient utility. Change management, as any successful executive understands, requires clear communication about updated expectations and consistent enforcement of revised boundaries. The education process was proceeding exactly according to strategic planning projections. The education process was proceeding exactly according to strategic planning projections, but I underestimated Margaret's capacity for escalation. Tuesday morning brought her phone call with the precision of a military operation, arriving at exactly 9:15 a.m. when she calculated I would be available for conversation before my corporate responsibilities demanded full attention. "Nicole, dear," she began, her voice carrying that particular blend of maternal warmth and steel-edged determination that had been refined through decades of family management. "I hope you have been well. Jeffrey mentioned that you two have been experiencing some communication challenges recently." Communication challenges. The euphemism was masterfully chosen, reframing my strategic financial boundary establishment as a relationship problem requiring maternal intervention rather than a business decision based on comprehensive performance analysis. Margaret, I replied, settling into my home office chair while opening my laptop to access the documentation I had prepared for exactly this type of conversation. Jeffrey and I are navigating some adjustments to our financial arrangements, but nothing that requires extended family consultation or concern. She proceeded without acknowledging my attempt to establish conversational boundaries, launching into her prepared presentation with the confidence of someone accustomed to achieving desired outcomes through persistence and emotional manipulation. Nicole, I want you to know that I understand marriage can be challenging, particularly when career pressures create stress for both partners. Jeffrey has always been ambitious, and sometimes ambitious men require additional support from their wives while they build something meaningful for the future. The framework she was establishing painted Jeffrey as the visionary entrepreneur whose dreams required spousal sacrifice, while positioning me as the potentially unsupportive wife whose selfishness might prevent family success. The narrative structure was sophisticated in its assumptions about gender roles and financial responsibilities within marriage. However, Margaret continued without pausing for my response, we have an immediate situation that requires resolution regardless of whatever personal issues you and Jeffrey are working through. Christina's wedding dress has been selected, and the boutique requires a deposit of $3,000 by Friday to secure the gown for her ceremony. $3,000. The amount was substantial enough to represent a significant financial commitment, but not so large as to seem completely unreasonable for wedding-related expenses. Margaret had clearly calculated the request to fall within the range of what she considered my normal spending patterns for family celebrations. Christina found the perfect dress at that wonderful bridal salon downtown, Margaret continued, building enthusiasm for the purchase as if my emotional investment in Christina's happiness would override my recently established financial boundaries. It is exactly what she has been dreaming about since childhood, and the seamstress assured us that the alterations will be completed well before the ceremony date. The presentation was proceeding exactly as I had anticipated. Margaret was appealing to my presumed emotional attachment to Christina's wedding success while assuming that family celebration expenses would automatically be approved regardless of consultation or inclusion in planning processes. Margaret, I interrupted, applying the same firm tone I used for redirecting unproductive client meetings. Was I consulted about this dress selection, or was my financial contribution simply presumed based on historical patterns of automatic payment for family expenses? The question appeared to catch her off guard, probably because direct challenges to her authority were unprecedented in her experience with family financial coordination. Well, Christina did mention that she hoped you would be willing to help with wedding costs, and of course we all assumed that you would want to contribute to such an important milestone in her life. That is an interesting assumption, I replied, opening the spreadsheet that documented months of financial contributions to family events that had excluded my participation. Christina hoped I would help with wedding costs and everyone assumed my willingness to contribute, but no one considered including me in the selection process or consulting my preferences about spending priorities. Margaret's voice acquired the slight strain that indicated she was beginning to recognize that this conversation was not proceeding according to her expectations about maternal authority and family financial hierarchies. Nicole, this is not the time for whatever grievances you have been collecting about family dynamics. Christina's wedding is happening in 3 months, and this dress deposit cannot wait for you to work through your personal issues with inclusion or recognition or whatever feminist concepts are influencing your perspective. The dismissive reference to feminist concepts was particularly revealing, suggesting that Margaret viewed my boundary establishment as ideological rebellion rather than practical business management applied to relationships that had been operating according to dysfunctional financial parameters. Actually, Margaret, this is precisely the time to address family financial planning that has been proceeding without consultation of the primary funding source, I said, maintaining professional composure while delivering strategic clarification about updated expectations. Family supporting family is a beautiful principle that I have embraced enthusiastically for 12 years of marriage. However, I have noticed that this principle appears to have selective application. Family supports family financially through automatic payment of celebration expenses, business development costs, and lifestyle enhancement purchases. But somehow family does not include family socially when meaningful participation might be expected. Margaret's silence stretched longer than quarterly budget approval processes, filled with the ambient sounds of her probably calculating alternative approaches to securing the dress deposit without acknowledging the validity of my concerns about systematic exclusion from family decision-making. Nicole, I understand that you feel overlooked sometimes, and perhaps we could have been more thoughtful about including you in planning discussions. But right now we have an immediate need that requires your financial assistance, and Christina should not suffer because of communication problems between adults. The strategic repositioning was expertly executed, framing Christina as the innocent victim of my unreasonable demands while maintaining Margaret's position as the reasonable mediator seeking practical solutions to unnecessary complications. That is exactly the problem, Margaret, I replied, recognizing the manipulation technique while refusing to be deflected from establishing clear boundaries about future financial arrangements. Christina should not suffer because of communication problems between adults. She should benefit from comprehensive planning that includes the people providing financial support in the decision-making processes that affect their resources. I opened my comprehensive analysis of family financial contributions over the previous 18 months, prepared specifically for this type of strategic negotiation. Since January of last year, I have contributed approximately $15,000 to Jeffrey's family celebrations, business development activities, and lifestyle enhancement purchases. The engagement party photography, holiday celebrations, networking event expenses, client entertainment costs, and various gift purchases that were charged to accounts funded through my corporate salary. The mathematical precision appeared to shock Margaret into temporary reconsideration of her assumptions about my emotional reactivity overwhelming practical financial analysis. However, I continued, my inclusion in planning processes for these expenditures has been minimal, and my participation in celebration activities has been consistently optional despite my essential role in funding those celebrations. The pattern suggests that my value to family relationships consists primarily of financial utility rather than personal significance. Margaret's response revealed the depth of her discomfort with having traditional family authority structures challenged through systematic documentation and business-level analysis. Nicole, you are making this much more complicated than necessary. Families help each other because that is what families do. You cannot apply corporate negotiation strategies to personal relationships that are based on love and mutual support rather than transactional exchanges. Love and mutual support, I repeated, testing the phrases for consistency with actual relationship dynamics I had experienced over 12 years of marriage and family interaction. Margaret, when was the last time your family demonstrated love and mutual support for my professional achievements, personal interests, or social preferences without expecting corresponding financial contributions or practical services in return? The question hung between us like expensive perfume, impossible to ignore while Margaret searched for examples that would support her theoretical framework about family relationships operating according to principles of generous reciprocity rather than systematic financial exploitation. Furthermore, I continued, applying the same focused determination I used for crucial contract negotiations where favorable terms required comprehensive justification. $3,000 for Christina's wedding dress represents a substantial financial commitment that warrants consultation with the person providing the funding. If this purchase is genuinely important for Christina's happiness, then including me in the selection process would demonstrate respect for both my financial contribution and my role as her sister-in-law. Margaret's voice acquired the strained quality that indicated she was confronting the uncomfortable reality that her traditional manipulation strategies were proving ineffective against someone with superior financial leverage and professional negotiation experience. What exactly are you expecting, Nicole? Christina has already selected the dress. The boutique requires the deposit by Friday, and your demands for inclusion cannot change arrangements that have already been finalized. My expectations are straightforward and entirely reasonable, I replied, maintaining the calm authority I used for setting clear parameters with difficult clients. Future family financial planning will include the people providing funding in decision-making processes, not merely payment processes. Respect and reciprocity will become prerequisites for access to my resources. Those requesting financial support will earn it through their own contributions and consideration rather than assumed entitlement based on family connections. The paradigm shift was clearly causing Margaret significant cognitive discomfort as she realized that her assumptions about family hierarchies and financial obligations were being challenged by someone with superior economic position and strategic thinking capabilities. This is unreasonable, Nicole. You cannot hold Christina's wedding dress hostage to prove some point about communication or inclusion. I am not holding anything hostage, Margaret. I am establishing appropriate boundaries around discretionary spending that requires advance consultation rather than automatic approval. If Christina's dress selection had included my input as the person funding the purchase, we would not be having this conversation about deposit deadlines and payment authorization. The wedding dress ultimatum represented more than a single purchase decision. It symbolized the entire structure of family relationships that had operated according to my financial utility without corresponding recognition of my personal significance. Margaret's uncomfortable silence suggested she was beginning to understand that the family's unpaid financial consultant had established new terms of service that prioritized mutual respect over convenient exploitation. The traditional manipulation strategies that had successfully secured unlimited funding for family priorities were no longer effective against someone who had finally learned to value her own contributions appropriately. The traditional manipulation strategies that had successfully secured unlimited funding for family priorities were no longer effective against someone who had finally learned to value her own contributions appropriately. Margaret's uncomfortable silence stretched through Wednesday and Thursday, suggesting she was consulting with other family members about alternative approaches to securing Christina's dress deposit without acknowledging the validity of my boundary establishment. Friday afternoon brought an unexpected visitor who would transform my understanding of Jeffrey's financial deception from systematic thoughtlessness into deliberate manipulation designed to enhance his professional reputation at my expense. David arrived at our apartment carrying a leather portfolio that immediately suggested he was conducting business rather than making a social call. Christina's fiancé possessed the methodical demeanor of someone who had spent considerable time organizing complex information for presentation, and his expression conveyed the uncomfortable seriousness of someone about to deliver news that would fundamentally alter existing relationships. "Nicole, I apologize for arriving without advance notice," he said, declining my offer of coffee while settling into our living room with the focused attention of someone who had rehearsed this conversation extensively. "But I have information about Jeffrey's financial activities that I believe you need to review before making decisions about ongoing family support." The portfolio he opened contained 18 months of meticulously organized receipts, expense reports and transaction records that painted a comprehensive picture of Jeffrey's systematic misuse of my corporate income to construct an elaborate facade of professional success and generous family support. "Christina has been concerned about her brother's financial behavior for months," David explained, spreading documents across our coffee table with the precision of someone presenting evidence in a legal proceeding. "She asked me to investigate when she noticed inconsistencies between Jeffrey's claimed business success and the reality of his consulting income. The investigation had revealed financial manipulation that exceeded my worst assumptions about Jeffrey's casual disregard for budgetary boundaries and consultation protocols. These were not impulse purchases or thoughtless overspending patterns, but calculated image construction activities designed to position Jeffrey as the successful consultant who could afford lavish client entertainment and generous family contributions. Client dinner receipts showed systematic inflation of entertainment expenses through selection of premium restaurants, expensive wine pairings, and elaborate meal presentations that far exceeded reasonable business development costs. Jeffrey had been using my income to create an impression of financial success that would attract high-value clients impressed by apparent prosperity and sophisticated lifestyle preferences. Professional conference registrations revealed attendance at luxury industry events that provided minimal educational value but maximum networking opportunities in exclusive settings where appearance of affluence would enhance Jeffrey's credibility with potential clients. The expenses included premium accommodations, first-class travel arrangements, and entertainment activities that positioned him as the established consultant rather than the struggling entrepreneur he actually represented. Most damaging were the family support expenditures that had been presented to me as necessary contributions to important celebrations but had actually been designed to enhance Jeffrey's reputation as the generous family member who could afford to treat everyone lavishly. The engagement party photography holiday celebration upgrades, and surprise gift purchases had been strategic investments in social capital that enhanced Jeffrey's standing within family hierarchies while being funded entirely through my corporate salary. The engagement party planning provides the clearest example of deliberate deception, David continued, presenting correspondence between Jeffrey and various vendors that revealed the scope of his unauthorized financial commitments using my resources. Christina had originally requested modest celebration consisting of dinner at a nice restaurant for immediate family members, with estimated costs of approximately $800 for the entire event. Jeffrey had systematically lobbied for elaborate enhancements including professional photography, premium catering options, specialty cocktail service, and custom decorations that would quadruple the original budget while creating the impression that he could afford sophisticated celebration planning for important family milestones. When Christina had expressed concern about escalating costs and their impact on my financial obligations, Jeffrey had assured her that money was not a concern because his consulting business was generating sufficient revenue to support generous family celebration expenses. The deception had been comprehensive and deliberate, designed to maintain Jeffrey's image as the successful provider while concealing his complete financial dependence on my corporate income. The decision to exclude you from the final celebration was Jeffrey's recommendation, David revealed, his discomfort evident as he delivered information that would devastate any remaining assumptions about accidental oversight versus deliberate exclusion. He convinced Christina that smaller gatherings would be more intimate and meaningful, but the real reason was his concern that your presence might lead to questions about expense authorization and budget approval that would reveal his lack of independent financial resources. Jeffrey had orchestrated my exclusion from the engagement celebration I had unknowingly funded because my presence represented potential exposure of his financial dependence and unauthorized spending patterns. The systematic exclusion had been calculated to protect his manufactured image as the generous family member rather than thoughtless oversight of my social significance. The evidence David presented documented a pattern of financial manipulation that transformed Jeffrey's consulting business from entrepreneurial aspiration into elaborate performance art funded entirely through my professional success while I remained unaware of the scope of resources being diverted to support his reputation management activities. Professional development expenses I had assumed were legitimate business investments had actually been luxury lifestyle enhancement purchases designed to create an appearance of success that would attract clients impressed by apparent prosperity. Networking event costs had included premium accommodations, entertainment expenses, and wardrobe upgrades that positioned Jeffrey as the established consultant rather than revealing his actual financial circumstances. Family celebration contributions I had provided willingly to support important milestones had been exploited as opportunities for Jeffrey to demonstrate generosity and financial capability that enhanced his social standing within family hierarchies while concealing the source of funding that made such demonstrations possible. Nicole, I wanted you to have this information before Christina's wedding planning proceeds further, David said, closing the portfolio after ensuring I had reviewed all relevant documentation. Jeffrey has already volunteered your financial support for several wedding expenses without consulting either Christina or you about budget parameters or expense authorization. The wedding dress deposit Margaret had demanded represented only the initial component of comprehensive financial commitments Jeffrey had made using my resources to enhance his reputation as the generous brother who could afford to support his sister's celebration in style appropriate to family expectations and social standing. That evening's confrontation with Jeffrey represented the comprehensive performance evaluation our marriage had been avoiding for 12 years of increasingly dysfunctional financial arrangements and social relationship patterns that had operated according to my utility rather than my significance. When Jeffrey returned from his Friday networking event, carrying his usual optimism about potential client connections and business development opportunities, I was prepared for the systematic dismantling of justifications he would inevitably offer for the documented evidence of deliberate financial manipulation and calculated image construction activities. Nicole, I understand that you have been reviewing some financial information with David. Jeffrey began, apparently having been warned about the documentary evidence presentation and prepared with defensive strategies for minimizing the significance of his deceptive practices. Actually, Jeffrey, I have been conducting a comprehensive audit of your systematic misuse of my corporate income to fund elaborate professional image construction and family reputation enhancement activities that operated without my knowledge or authorization, I replied, maintaining the professional composure I used for delivering performance reviews to underperforming team members. His attempt to frame the conversation as routine financial planning discussion rather than accountability session for deliberate deception revealed his continued assumption that explanation and justification would be sufficient to restore access to unlimited discretionary spending without meaningful consequences for systematic manipulation of our marriage's economic foundation. The evidence David had provided eliminated any possibility of characterizing Jeffrey's financial behavior as thoughtless oversight or poor communication about spending priorities. This had been calculated exploitation of my professional success to fund lifestyle enhancement and reputation management activities that benefited Jeffrey's social and professional standing while excluding me from meaningful participation in the relationships and celebrations my money had made possible. The performance review proceeded with mathematical precision, systematic documentation, and professional accountability standards that Jeffrey had never previously encountered in our personal relationship dynamics. The marriage that had operated according to his convenience and assumptions was being restructured according to principles of mutual respect, reciprocal consideration, and appropriate boundaries around financial resources that required consultation rather than automatic availability for image construction purposes. The comprehensive evaluation would determine whether our relationship could be rebuilt according to partnership principles or whether the systematic exploitation had caused irreparable damage to trust and respect that could no longer be reconstructed through apologies and promises of improved behavior. The comprehensive evaluation would determine whether our relationship could be rebuilt according to partnership principles or whether the systematic exploitation had caused irreparable damage to trust and respect that could no longer be reconstructed through apologies and promises of improved behavior. Jeffrey's response to the documented evidence of his financial manipulation would reveal whether genuine change was possible or whether our marriage had been irreparably damaged by years of systematic deception about spending priorities and family relationship dynamics. The accountability process began with Jeffrey's comprehensive confession to his entire family, delivered through an email that represented the first time in our 12-year marriage that he had accepted full responsibility for relationship problems rather than deflecting blame or minimizing the significance of his behavior patterns. The message, which I reviewed before he sent it, acknowledged his systematic misuse of my corporate income to enhance his professional image and social standing within family hierarchies. He admitted to making unauthorized financial commitments using my resources, excluding me from celebration planning processes while including my funding requirements, and treating me as a business resource rather than a life partner whose preferences and schedule deserved consideration in family decision-making processes. Most significantly, Jeffrey accepted responsibility for orchestrating my exclusion from family events that I had unknowingly funded, acknowledging that these exclusions had been calculated to protect his manufactured image as the generous provider rather than accidental oversights of my social significance. The confession eliminated his family's ability to characterize my boundary establishment as emotional overreaction or unreasonable demands for attention and recognition. The email generated immediate responses from family members who had previously supported Jeffrey's perspective about my supposedly unreasonable financial demands. Christina called to apologize for her participation in planning processes that had excluded me while presuming my financial support. Margaret sent a written apology acknowledging that family celebration planning should have included my input as the person providing funding for those celebrations. Michael's response revealed the most dramatic shift in understanding, as he recognized that his lectures about proper wifely behavior had been delivered to someone who had been systematically exploited rather than someone who was failing to meet reasonable marital obligations. His acknowledgement of my professional competence and financial contributions represented a fundamental change in his assessment of family relationship dynamics and gender-based authority structures. However, confession represented only the initial component of reconstruction process that would require demonstrated behavioral change rather than promised improvements. My insistence on evidence-based accountability rather than emotional appeals reflected the same performance management principles I applied to underperforming team members whose continued employment depended on measurable improvement rather than good intentions. Jeffrey opened independent checking and savings accounts to manage his actual consulting income, separating his business expenses from household budget allocations that had previously enabled unlimited discretionary spending without consultation or accountability measures. The process forced him to confront the reality of his consulting practice's financial performance without the subsidization that had concealed poor business development return on investment. Learning to operate within his real earning capacity rather than my subsidized lifestyle created immediate challenges for Jeffrey's professional image construction activities and social relationship maintenance strategies. Client entertainment expenses required careful budgeting and advance planning rather than automatic approval. Networking event participation demanded evaluation of cost versus expected benefit rather than assumption that attendance would be funded regardless of outcomes. Family gift purchases and celebration contributions needed to reflect Jeffrey's actual financial capacity rather than his desired reputation as the generous brother who could afford lavish demonstrations of family support. The adjustment process revealed how extensively his social identity had been constructed through financial resources he had not personally earned or managed responsibly. The reconstruction process extended beyond financial arrangements to include fundamental changes in communication patterns and decision-making processes that had previously excluded my preferences while presuming my cooperation with plans developed without my input. Family celebration planning now required advanced discussion about scheduling, budgeting, and participation expectations rather than last-minute notification about events I was expected to attend or fund. Professional development decisions affecting household budget allocations needed justification based on expected return on investment rather than automatic approval based on Jeffrey's assessment of potential benefits. The business planning discipline I applied to corporate campaign development became the standard for evaluating Jeffrey's consulting practice expenditures and strategic initiatives. Most importantly, social relationship maintenance activities could no longer operate according to my automatic financial support paired with optional inclusion in meaningful participation. Jeffrey's family interactions needed to acknowledge my contributions and preferences rather than treating me as the invisible funding source for visible family generosity. The validation process culminated 6 months later at Christina's wedding celebration, where I discovered my name calligraphed on a family table place card positioned between Jeffrey's parents and his siblings. The inclusion represented genuine recognition of my family membership rather than obligatory accommodation of Jeffrey's spouse, and the celebration had been planned and funded entirely through Christina and David's resources rather than presumed subsidization through my income. The wedding reception conversation revealed how significantly family relationship dynamics had shifted following Jeffrey's comprehensive confession and my boundary establishment process. Christina expressed genuine gratitude for my business consultation work on her boutique launch, acknowledging how my professional expertise had contributed to her entrepreneurial success and offering to provide referrals for my marketing services to other small business owners. Margaret discussed my corporate responsibilities and professional achievements with the same interest she had previously reserved for Jeffrey's consulting aspirations, recognizing my work as valuable in its own right rather than merely as the funding source for family lifestyle enhancement. The conversation included questions about my board presentation outcomes and promotion opportunities that demonstrated authentic concern for my professional development and career satisfaction. David mentioned his appreciation for my willingness to provide honest feedback about family financial planning and celebration coordination, noting that my business management perspective had helped Christina develop more realistic budgeting and timeline expectations for wedding preparation activities. The acknowledgement represented recognition of my professional competence applied to personal relationship dynamics rather than expectation of unlimited accommodation without corresponding respect. Most significantly, Jeffrey introduced me to other wedding guests as his wife and business partner whose marketing expertise had been essential to his consulting practice development, crediting my strategic thinking and client relationship skills as crucial components of his recent contract success with Harrison Industries. The introduction represented accurate acknowledgement of my contributions rather than minimization of my role in his professional achievement. The foundation of authentic relationships that emerged from this reconstruction process operated according to principles of mutual respect and reciprocal consideration rather than assumed obligation and unilateral accommodation. Family members who wanted my professional advice or financial contribution now approached me directly with specific requests that acknowledged the value of my expertise and time investment rather than presuming automatic availability of services without compensation or recognition. Jeffrey's consulting business began generating consistent revenue once he applied the strategic planning discipline and client relationship management techniques I had been recommending for years, but which had been ignored while unlimited funding enabled him to avoid accountability for poor performance outcomes. His success reflected the application of business principles rather than continued subsidization of ineffective practices through my corporate income. The financial boundaries I had established created space for relationships based on mutual respect rather than financial convenience, eliminating the resentment and exploitation patterns that had characterized family interactions for years. My willingness to refuse treatment I did not deserve had forced everyone to confront assumptions about my role and value that had operated according to their convenience rather than my significance. The most effective personal justice, I discovered, involved reconstruction of myself rather than destruction of others. Creating appropriate boundaries around my resources and respect had not punished anyone, but had eliminated the dysfunctional dynamics that had prevented authentic relationship development. The foundation of mutual respect and reciprocal consideration that emerged proved more valuable than all the money I had previously spent attempting to purchase approval and inclusion that should have been offered freely based on recognition of my inherent worth rather than my utility to others' lifestyle preferences. The marriage that had operated according to Jeffrey's assumptions about automatic accommodation had been rebuilt according to partnership principles that acknowledged my contributions while respecting my preferences. The family relationships that had exploited my professional success and financial resources had been restructured to operate according to genuine appreciation rather than convenient utility. The downtown apartment where I had felt invisible in my own life had become the home where I was valued for my presence as much as my provision, where my opinions influenced decisions rather than being dismissed, and where my professional success was celebrated rather than merely exploited for others' benefit. The foundation of authentic respect, it turned out, was worth more than all the money I had spent attempting to purchase recognition that had been mine by right from the beginning. If this story of financial revenge had you captivated from start to finish, hit that like button immediately. My favorite moment was when Nicole delivered that perfectly calculated response during Jeffrey's restaurant crisis, mirroring his dismissive words with surgical precision. What was your most satisfying moment in Nicole's journey to reclaim her respect? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Stay connected for more compelling stories of personal empowerment and strategic boundary setting. Subscribe and activate that notification bell to ensure you receive every new upload.